Hi guys, I'm Resaixo, and today I am going to be telling you all how I did the 3 mashups. Now, as some of you that follow my channel know, I just released the 3rd and final mashup in what I am referring to as the Shelter Trilogy, which is 3 different mashups covering as much of the discographies as I could of both Porter Robinson and Madeon. And today I'm going to be describing to you all how I did each of the mashups, so let's get into it. So the one thing I can say about these mashups right off the bat is the key to figuring them out is figuring out which songs of the artist or artists you're trying to use that fit together. It's effectively like putting together a puzzle that hasn't been created yet. The best thing that you can possibly do is isolate very specific elements of songs that fit within a certain constraint or part of the pitch or frequency spectrum. I know that sounds really complicated, but I'll try to explain it as I go. So yeah, so this is the first mashup. It came out April of last year, but then May of this year just started blowing up for no reason. Literally shot up from 1,000 views to right now almost 250,000 and nearly 7,500 likes. And it's been like 4 months and is mind-blowing to me. Okay, so right off the bat here, I knew I wanted to have Sea of Voices be the bass track for everything. Because the great thing about Sea of Voices is that for the vast majority of the track, it's all chords or bass or just more non-moving elements. So if I cut off part of the high end or something like that, you could put more stuff onto there and layer things on top of it. So it's a great foundational bass song for that in general. This is unfortunately the only one of the mashups that I was able to have a song quite like that. Plus Sea of Voices is one of my favorite songs ever, so it was perfect. So immediately from here you can hear the She Heals Everything arpeggio going throughout this whole thing. After I isolated the lower area of the sound, I wanted something to be a bit more quick moving and to fill up the more high background atmospheric part of the song. So with that, it seemed like a natural fit to take the She Heals Everything art because it's quick moving, it's really atmospheric, and it's something I really love. The She Heals Everything arpeggio at the beginning of that song is probably my favorite thing that Porter Robinson has ever done. Now the thing about that arpeggio is that you can either find it and it is super fast and slightly out of key in different ways with a lot of other stuff above and beneath it, or you can try to somehow isolate one of the live recordings of She Heals Everything in which the tempo changes, so that was kind of impossible to work with on this. So in the end, I made the decision to completely remake the arpeggio from scratch, so I made something that sounded like a good arp sound and just drew out all the notes manually, and then I adjusted some of the notes to get them into the right key because some of them sounded just kind of out of key, so I drop it a half step or raise one a half step or something like that. And so basically what you're hearing there is about 250, 300 notes of manually placed stuff. Because the thing with these is sometimes you want to achieve something and it seems like you just absolutely cannot do it, so you have to improvise. I also was able to isolate the acapellas of both Divinity and Shelter, which was really, really very helpful because I was able to take those a cappella samples and alternate them with each other, sort of like a call and response vocal call. And fortunately, they all fit into around the same key when just pitched slightly differently in either direction, so it worked great. The thing that I figured out is that pretty much undoubtedly Shelter has a more emotional vocal than Divinity. So the best advice I can give is using a vocal chop like Divinity at the very beginning of the mashup, and then as it starts getting into the more soft, resolute, emotional parts, switch it up in some way. So what I did was I took out the spaces where Divinity was and just had the Shelter vocal come in every once in a while, but then changed the octave of it. So it was a bit more emotional, a bit more atmospheric, and sort of let the arpeggio of She Heals Everything come through a little more without the extra grit of Divinity. The amazing thing about this one particular part is that Shelter comes in right as the She Heals Everything arp goes up an octave. It fits so incredibly well because you have Sea of Voices that's just naturally building at this point. And with this, I was able to get it timed out to where the shelter vocal starts off as the arpeggio goes an octave higher, and then finishes just as Sea of Voices hits one of its really big moments, and then that's where I brought in the Technicolor Divinity mashup. I thought it was just a perfect moment because everything is building up so big at that point, and it felt like it was really impactful to bring back in the vocal chops and to have this really big emotional instrumental build with it. I love that. And at that point, I just started looping in the shelter vocal chops for the entire line rather than just chopping it at one particular point, because you have all this really amazing chord stuff, you have the really high arpeggio going in the background, and you have the bass going underneath it. So it makes sense to have a high end be sort of filled in by a shelter vocal chop. Now, looking back at this, of course, it was over a year ago. There were some things I could have improved. I personally really like the atmosphere of this section, but I also know that a lot of people think it's a bit too crowded. I can absolutely see where they're coming from as far as that's concerned. There is a lot of stuff going on all at the same time. And in a way, the Technicolor lead sort of conflicts slightly with the She Heals Everything arp and the shelter vocal chop, but also weirdly enough with the reverb, I personally really liked it, which is why I kept that in there. Yes, it's very chaotic, but it's also this incredible atmospheric build that builds to this point of just this wall of sound before it all disappears completely and the drop comes in, which is something I really loved about the Technicolor Divinity mashup in general, and I sort of wanted to accentuate it with this one, but I get people have their complaints, but, you know, whatever. Now, at this point, I did something really weird in that I took the little vocal line from Sea of Voices right before the drop comes in, because I wanted to have that same kind of epic feeling of all the sound getting sucked out with that one little tiny vocal line before everything comes crashing in. And I think I sort of accomplished that. Kind of. Not really. I was also super stoked because the fill that was used going into that first drop, I just put it in for the sake of having a little bit of a methodical marching build into it. I don't believe that was in one of the original songs. I'm pretty sure I put that in on my own, but it was a year ago, so I don't know. I'm pretty sure I put that in on my own, and if any of you have seen the Nix's freestyling montage, they use the mashup in there, and they have this epic pan in and pan out of the camera just as it's getting to the drum part, and I'm like, ooh, I did that. I can't remember exactly which one I used, but I know in the little arpeggio section I used a vocal chop from one of the songs. I think it was Divinity, but I'm not sure. You can hear it very lightly in the background there if you're paying attention to it. That's the only difference between my mashup and the original Technicolor Divinity mashup. And with that, I specifically use the plain Technicolor Divinity mashup, not just because it's absolutely perfect in its own right, and I just sort of wanted it to have its own breathing room in the mashup, but also because, honestly, it is the best drop I have ever heard in my entire life, so I absolutely wanted to have it in on its own pretty much unimpeded. Porter and Madeon were absolute geniuses when they put that together, and I didn't want to touch that because it's amazing and you let genius play itself. Now at this point, of course, the Divinity vocal chops are in there, which is a little bit meta for its own good. But you also have the shelter vocal chops that come in there and are sort of mixing up with the Divinity vocals, and I thought it was cool, but I don't know. Okay, this is my one regret from this actual mashup, is that you have the really pretty arpeggio from the Divinity mashup that is in there, and then I layered the entire drop of Sea of Voices right underneath it, going super fast without any kind of impactful drums whatsoever. So in order to cover up the fact that I had made a non-punchy monstrosity, I sidechained both of them, which effectively, if you don't know what that means, it means ducking the volume right as a kick drum comes in, and then putting in my own kick and snares to fill up the space and make it a bit more punchy. Now, granted, unfortunately, I use kick drums and snares that were not particularly powerful and a little bit muted, and it sort of muddied up the rest of it. And honestly, I could have done without putting the Sea of Voices thing in there. And then I wouldn't have had to swap out the drums or anything, and it was just a complete mess. And that is my one regret from this mashup. I wish I could have fixed that because it sounds super muddy even to me. It did then, it does now. If I had taken a bit more time with it, I could have fixed that one part, but, you know, hindsight's 20/20, right? Okay, now honestly, this moment is my favorite part of the entire mashup because it felt like everything fit in so incredibly well with everything else. You get the second Shelter vocal put in there, you get the Divinity vocal chops that are put in there, and then along with my terrible drums, you have the little Goodbye to a World pluck that's going on in the background, isolated on its own to create a sort of little atmospheric backdrop, and to also accentuate what's coming up, which is the entire Goodbye to a World section. I think it was at this point when listening to this over again that I was like, oh my god, I actually did this. I actually took all of my favorite Porter Robinson songs and actually managed to put them together in a way that didn't sound horrific. Anyways, let's go on. Now, funny story with this, the bass of Goodbye to a World here got super muddled because if you haven't noticed, it's really, really slow. So what I did was I took the isolated acapella of Goodbye to a World because fortunately there's a part in the song where there is no instrumentation with it. Sometimes you just gotta get creative with figuring out where you can isolate little acapellas and instrumental parts when you don't have an acapella or instrumental readily available to you. So then I basically cut off the entire low end, which means all the bass stuff and everything like that, and then put in my own sub bass that would still match the key, and it sort of rolled around a bit, which I really kind of liked. So this whole part, even though it's really slowed down, I really kind of like the slow effect of Goodbye to a World in this, and I was of course able to take the instrumental isolated and the vocal isolated, layer them on top of each other, slow it way down, cut off the low part of the instrumental, and then draw on my own thing. This was honestly one of the hardest parts to do of the entire mashup because I had to make a lot of compromises to make sure that the vocal didn't sound muddled or distorted, and that the bass would sound really good, and that just everything would be lined up, because I knew if it wasn't perfect, I would be ripped to shreds by every single one of y'all Porter Robinson fans. It's okay, I'm a fan too. I would rip myself to shreds. Now this, as quiet and unassuming as the part is, was actually the absolute hardest thing to do in this entire song, bar none, without question. The really convenient thing that I had come across was that the Technicolor Divinity mashup that was the first drop in this, and Sea of Voices, were in the same key as each other, or at least in compatible keys with each other. So I didn't have to change any keys as far as that was concerned, but I had to alter and change the key of pretty much every single other thing in the song in order to match those two things. Because my two absolute favorite drops in the entire Porter Robinson canon are Divinity Technicolor and Sea of Voices. So I wanted to make sure that I included both of those in there. I didn't just want to repeat one after the other. I wanted to make sure that both of them were unique. But the challenge that I had was I didn't want Sea of Voices to come off sounding really fast or rushed. I didn't want to have those stupid drums in there trying to replace it, because then it would just sound cliched and awful. So the little pitch bend that you hear at the end of the Goodbye to a World section is actually a few measures of time where the tempo is coming down, and it actually changes the pitch of the echo, reverb, delay thing down a step or two in order to match what would then become the Sea of Voices part of the song. Now, the big issue with this was, at this point, FL Studio, the program that I've used for everything I've ever made, didn't have any kind of real-time repitching feature, which basically means that when the tempo was turned down, the pitch of the song also dropped by about 5 or 6 steps. So it sounded a little bit less like a heavenly chorus chord thing and more like demon worshipping. Actually, let me see if I can show exactly what it sounded like, because it's pretty great. Now, admittedly, that would have been very interesting, and it has its own sort of charm to it, but I wanted it to be the, legit version of it. So again, I had to get a little bit creative with that bit in that I rendered out the entire song up until the post Goodbye to a World tempo drop, and then re-rendered the song again a second time, but only taking Sea of Voices through the ending of it, Sea of Voices with the pitch corrected and everything like that, so that it would all be in line of what I wanted it to be. And then afterwards took those two files and, sliced, spliced, and stuck them all together until it was able to get a cohesive final product, which took so long for me to finally figure that out. But yeah, so this song is effectively a 2-file patchwork that I just sort of shoved together and chopped, and yeah. Now, Sea of Voices is another one that I sort of just wanted to leave on its own. I didn't want to add too many instrumental parts of it. But I did make the decision to add in the Shelter and Divinity vocal chops in there just because I felt like it sort of gave it this grand epic feeling at the end of it, combined with everything else, and it lended itself well to having that. So I was happy with how that went. And I thought that was a pretty good time to start re-implementing and reintroducing the entire She Heals Everything arpeggio. Of course, it's slowed down to a slower tempo than it was when the song first started, when the mashup first started. But I feel like it works pretty well for this. It's a good intro and ending kind of bookends sort of thing. And then, of course, at the very end here, if you're paying attention really closely, you can hear the little far-off reverbed background Shelter vocal chop at the end. I was way too smug with myself about doing that, but hopefully some of y'all catched it. Hopefully all of you catched it. I don't know. Wow, so it's gone up 100 views since I started this whole thing. It's now just a couple likes away from 7,500. Jeez, by the time I'm done recording this whole thing, it's probably gonna be there completely and have gained another freaking 1,000 or something, I don't know. Okay, now on to the second one. This is All My Sad Machines, which I released as a way to celebrate 10,000 views on the mashup in June, on June 19th. So if that tells you how quickly this thing has gone from 10,000 up to 250,000 in the matter of a couple months, it's insane. At the time I was making this, I thought it was going to be the last one I was doing, but as I was releasing it, I figured out that there is still so much other material from both Porter and Madeon that I could use, that I could create an entire third mashup. So I made the decision to, rather than this just being a sequel, it was going to be a full-on trilogy with 3 mashups covering almost all of the songs of both of them, which I think I did decently well, checking them off the list at least. So this entire idea was birthed because I was listening to All My Friends and for some reason started humming the little Sad Machine melody along with it. I thought, these songs would go really, really well together. The good thing about Sad Machine in particular was that it was super easy to remake, because it was harder to get the isolated lead sound that I wanted to match up with the All My Friends vocal and instrumental. So fortunately, Porter uses a lot of sounds within FL Studio under the Fruity LSD plugin, which basically just means they are stock sounds that come with the computer. And I haven't heard a huge amount of people use those sounds very much, but he uses them a lot in his Worlds album, and Sad Machine is no exception. So within Sad Machine in Fruity LSD, which is like a single MIDI thing or whatever, if you choose the preset Brightness, you get the actual sound that you will recognize from Sad Machine. Simple enough. So once that was done, all I really had to do was take that specific lead sound and match it up with the vocal and instrumental from All My Friends. So also that entire little plucky gamey sound that he uses right at the end of the song is also one of those MIDI preset LSD things. Cannot remember what it is right now, but it is one of those presets. So I just matched those two up. It sounded as good as I hoped it would, and I just took it from there.
All my friends are watching. Is anyone there? I can hear them talking.
Of course, it helped so much that Madeon released both the acapella and instrumental for All My Friends. I literally could not have done this without that. Fortunately, with this particular song, I was able to take the Sad Machine vocal right at the beginning of the song. And of course I was able to get it without any instrumentation because that whole part is said before any instrumental comes in. Thank you, Porter, you god. Now, since I had to change the key of All My Friends so much, that entire little punchy drum thing wasn't necessarily in there. So once again, just like the Sad Machine thing, I dropped the volume, sidechained the volume throughout that entire section, and then put in my own kick, snare, and I think ride. Just sort of just give it a little bit of extra punch. And of course, since this was more than a year after the first one, I feel like I got a little better at picking more natural drums to put in there, or at least ones that weren't so audibly intrusive in the mashup. I feel like they kind of fit a little better than the Sea of Voices ones did the first time around. Now, of course, one of the really important elements of any of these mashups is transitions in between things, and this can be done really easily because sometimes instrumentals lend themselves to natural transition points. Other times it's something as easy as taking a little cymbal transition or an impact or something like that just to give it a little whoosh into whatever the next part of it is. Now, with language, I try to take the instrumental part of language with the bass taken out and implement it into the song to get like the full power of it within there. But it just, again, sounded really weird and distorted because I had to change the key so much. So I made the decision not to do that, and also remade the melody of language in order to then implement it as the instrumental section in there. And in that one particular section of Sad Machine, I took a little vocal synth. I doubled the vocal and used this thing called vocal synth to put on there, and it kind of roboticizes the vocals, but can also add like lower end and higher end. It's really cool. You can get it, rent it to own it on Splice.com. Like it's great. Not sponsored by Splice. But in general with that, it added a little bit of extra bass that I felt like it was sort of missing. There is a little bit with language, but not a whole lot. So I felt like it just needed that little bit of extra oomph. So I put that in there to just sort of fill out that extra space. The best thing to do with these kind of mashups is if there is an empty space in some area of the song, whether it's the really high parts or the low parts, or there's just a lot of static non-movement in different areas, find something that fits in that particular section. With that, I put language in there and then doubled the vocal to sort of sandwich everything into it. It's really just figuring out what can I put at this next point in every different area of the track that sounds good. Now, sometimes that means cutting off the entire top part of one song and then cutting off only the bottom part of another one to sort of stick them together in a weird patchwork kind of thing. And other times it literally just means enhancing something you already have. Anyways. Now, with that, I was really happy with the fact that I tried, just for the fun of it, to put the Euron acapella, because I was able to get a hold of the acapella of Euron, and I tried just putting it in there, and magically it worked perfectly, just with a couple little pitch changes and all that, and it worked great. So I just isolated that one section, going into what would be the that whole thing. So I took that section and had it feed directly into the drop, which once again I used my own percussion for that in order to cover up the fact that the percussion sounded like garbage when I pitch shifted it. The absolute best thing that you can do with some of these particular songs, like the drop area in this section, is really study the particular songs and figure out what are the elements of them that you really like. And then if you know exactly what it is you're looking for, you can isolate those particular parts or instruments or elements of the song and then really effectively work with them. In this one, I really got to understand that bass line really well, so I think I was able to double it with a little extra pluck bass in order to just sort of enhance that sound a little bit and adding a little bit of sub bass to it. So yes, I think the pluck bass was me adding it on to what was already there, but I'm not entirely sure about that. But overall, that is just very plainly the drop of All My Friends mixed with the main lead of Sad Machine, and it's simple, but it works. It's energetic and it's fun. Now, in that case, I took the entire little "She Depends on You" because I think I was able to get a hold of that. Yes, that's right. I was able to get a hold of an acapella that I think someone re-synthesized using the same Vocaloid that Porter used. So if anyone notices, it's a slightly different sound than what the actual song is, but it's close enough to it to where it's the same voice effectively and it sounds accurate. But in that particular case, the only transition I used was a little bit of a tape stop to make the All My Friends vocal kind of go ooh, to then feed right into the "She Depends on You" and all that kind of stuff. So it's just figuring out little tiny boosts in energy that you can do with tiny little transitions like tape stops or pitch bends or something like that, just so it doesn't jolt from one part to the other. It's just coming up with what sounds good, and if it doesn't sound good, then change it to something else. Now, if you notice in the background there, I have the actual build-up melody of Technicolor, which is something that I tried to do with all three of the particular mashups. I took one song from each mashup and had it appear in at least one other mashup. So for this one, I utilized Technicolor a little bit more because the only thing I'd really used Technicolor with the last one was the drop of the song, but I wanted a really significant Madeon song that I could put into here and have it sort of carry through. And again, that was a melody that I remade to just make it fit within the song. There's a lot of stuff in this one in particular that I remade, actually. But yeah, so I remade Technicolor. So that is the crossover between the first mashup and the second one, is the little appearance of Technicolor in both of them. Now, in this one section, I sort of wanted the All My Friends instrumental to really kind of shine through with my awful replacement drums, because I just really love that kind of pluck bass that he has there at the bottom, and just the entire instrumental feel gives it sort of the feel of almost a whole different song. So in order to really sort of push into that feeling, I took the Euron vocal chops and just synced them up with the whole rest of the song to create a really kind of ethereal, atmospheric feel. Without having the All My Friends repeating itself over and over again. Now, that entire transition was just a really happy accident. I found the instrumental of Pay No Mind. I wasn't able to get the vocal of it, but I found the instrumental of Pay No Mind, and I thought, you know, this has a really similar kind of feeling to All My Friends. I wonder if it would work. So I took the part of it where it's building up to like, then she asked me how we got here, I told her I don't know, and I took that little section of it with its, you know, plucky guitars and all that, and I thought this is the perfect build up to transition from All My Friends. So I'm like, hey, I wonder if this would work. And I put it in, and weirdly enough, even though it's a complete switch in song, it sort of feels like, weirdly enough, a natural transition from one into the other, at least from the way I can hear it. So yeah, again, a lot of this is just trial and error and just figuring out what works, and sometimes you'll hit something and it's like, oh, that's magic, I love it, and you'll stick with it. And then of course I wanted to include a little more Easter egg-ish kind of things into this one, sort of like what I did with Goodbye to a World and She Heals Everything in the last song. So with this one, I included both the vocal chops of Flicker in this one section, and then the one little part of Fellow Feeling in it, the one little Hear What I Hear. And of course that snare buildup was also something that I made in order to transition from the Pay No Mind into All My Friends again. And there were some conflicts with instrumentals at different parts, and I had to do some tweaking on it, so that was a very long and strenuous process just trying to get that transition exactly right, but I feel like it worked pretty well. That entire little vocal put into that section was kind of a happy accident, where it's slightly offbeat from where you would expect it to be. I was trying to copy one note or sample or something from one part to another, and I accidentally clicked on the All My Friends acapella and dropped it at that one particular place as I was playing through the song. And it played into it, and I thought, you know, even though that's a completely wrong beat and everything, and it's sort of messing with my head a little bit, I like it. It kind of works. So I just left it in there. Again, completely happy accident. And of course, the Fellow Feeling vocal chop, I really wanted to add more Fellow Feeling into it, but that was the only thing I was able to sort of shoehorn into this mashup without it sounding weird. So that is the little transition point between the second and third mashups. It gives you a little hint as what's to come, because the third mashup very heavily features Fellow Feeling. Now, of course, under the kick and snare there, you could hear that it's finally gotten into that little chiptune version of Sad Machine underneath there, the other preset sound in Fruity LSD. The kick and snare is still going over it to sort of just keep up a little bit of energy to it, but I also wanted to include the entire sort of bridge verse thing, or whatever you would call it, with Sad Machine. I don't know much about your life. But this is the most distinctive part where you can tell it's not the original a cappella, right at the end here especially. I wanted it to match the original pitch of the actual Sad Machine vocal, because that was the one of the hear it in his voice in every call was the only note that did not actually match the original, and I'm like, oh, that's going to annoy me to death. So I went in with Newtone, which is FL Studio's default pitch editing program, and edited that one note back up to where it was in the original Sad Machine. But unfortunately, it doesn't sound like it did in Sad Machine. It just sounds like it goes... That was something that unfortunately I could not fix, because again, it is a robot, and robots are really hard to tune. But anyways, it sort of works. It adds sort of a weird vibe to it, which this whole mashup kind of has a weird vibe, so, you know, it works. I wasn't initially going to have this last thing in here. The way that the mashup was originally set out was that at the very end of the Sad Machine vocal, it was just going to end. And then I thought, for something that is relying so much on sort of its energy and bounce, I don't want it to just be cut off like that. I want it to have something where it fades out to something really soft and that you can just sort of, you know, get in the swing of things. And ironically, kind of warms you up for the third mashup. So I took the little chiptune Sad Machine lead, which it's used in the same kind of style at the very end of the actual Sad Machine, where it gets into just those soft little chords with the sound at the end of it. No vocals or drums or anything like that. And then I just took the melody of Language, really filtered out a lot of stuff, so it just hits very softly in the background, and then put the Your Own vocal on top of it, just because I thought that, you know, it really worked as pretty much the only vocal chop that I was able to put into this whole thing, so it was really good as sort of a transitioning out point. It's a really good way to end songs or mashups, is just, you know, make sure that you have your transitions between songs good, whether it's adding a little instrument to sweep between one and the other. But the biggest thing, of course, is just to make sure that everything is in key and everything is in tempo. Now, this last mashup was actually the absolute hardest one for me to do. As of last count, it's at 1,048 views and 120 likes, so everyone seems to be really enjoying it. I personally was terrified out of my mind to just release it. The thing with the other two mashups was, with the first one, I knew exactly what I wanted to do with it. I had all my favorite elements from the songs, and it sort of painted a picture in my head of exactly how I wanted to place them out. I wasn't really thinking anyone was going to hear it, and after a year it was pretty clear to me that almost no one had actually heard it, except close friends of mine and such who seemed to enjoy it for the most part. But it was something that I thought, even if no one else hears this, I am happy with it myself. It's something that I like because it takes all of my favorite elements from all these songs and puts it all together in one. And judging by all the comments that I've gotten from all of you out there, I am in such shock and awe about the fact that you all enjoy it as much as I have. And I'm seeing a lot of people who are having really visceral emotional reactions from it. I am just so grateful that the mashup that I made respects Porter and Madeon's music enough that you all are feeling such strong emotions to it. I've heard a lot of mashups that sort of get, you know, jolted all over the place and aren't very well structured, and I didn't want it to end up like that, and I'm really, really happy that everyone has taken to it as much as they have. So thank you for that. I really, really, really appreciate it. That being said, I'll get over that. The second mashup was basically put together because I heard two songs that I thought, hey, these would go really well together, and then everything was expanded off of that. The third mashup was the only one that I actually planned and decided I was going to make. It didn't just come naturally. I made the decision that I was going to make that third mashup. The problem was I had so many different songs that I could pick from, but nothing I was doing actually worked the way I wanted it to. So I made that preview that everyone saw on my channel, describing the start of it and, you know, how the first minute or so of the eventual mashup. And after that trailer was done, I thought, oh, I'm inspired finally after like 2 or 3 months. Like, I'm really getting into this and like I understand what I want to do with this and everything. And then I completely had producer's block. I could not think of anything else that I wanted to do with it. Nothing I was putting in was working. I mean, the thing is, I love Dream, 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 but it's really happy and it's in a more major key than something like Only Way Out, which is more minor. And I tried to throw nonsense into there, and it was way too happy and boppy with everything else. And it just really, really strained it a lot. So the secret of all of this was that I actually did this entire mashup, minus the first part that everyone heard in the trailer, in the previous 24 hours before I released it. I did everything within that 24-hour period, and I had almost no feedback from anyone going into actually releasing it. My parents and a couple friends of mine were pretty much the only ones who had heard it, and they basically gave me the all clear and said, yeah, it sounds good, but I thought this is super weird. I made it really quickly. People aren't going to like it as much. And everyone seems to have really enjoyed it. But this whole thing was put together on a very pressured mind, so there's a lot of weird stuff in this one. So the only thing I had at the beginning of this was taking the Dream, Dream, Dream vocal, which I was able to once again get that first vocal part without any instrumentation, because at the beginning of Dream, 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 there is no instrumentation, it's just a cappella. So I'm like, oh, perfect. This is the part of the song that I can use. So I took that, and I was going through the different Madeon songs that I really enjoyed, and more recently, I've really fallen in love with Only Way Out. It's a song that I sort of overlooked a lot while I was listening to Adventure first off, and then I heard it again in the car at one point, and the drop comes in at the very end, and I'm like, oh my god, this is the strongest drop that I have ever heard, and it's amazing. I absolutely loved it, and at that moment I was like, okay, I want to include that in the mashup. So the only 2 songs that I really knew I was going to use in this were Only Way Out and Dream, 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 and that came together pretty quickly. The arpeggio sort of matched the She Heals Everything element, and the Dream, Dream, Dream acapella sort of matched the Shelter acapella that comes in at the beginning. Even so far as the, you know, octave tune down kind of thing. But it still felt like it was missing that sort of sea of voices glue factor. So I went through and decided to use more of Fellow Feeling than just that singular vocal chop in the previous mashup, and use the entire violin intro at the beginning, which I have loved so much since I first heard it, as sort of the glue to tie all that together. Now, the pitches had to be changed a lot with these different things, and I learned something really cool about formant shifting. Formant shifting is basically something to where you can change the pitch of a particular instrument or vocal or audio sample or something like that without changing the actual timbre of the sound. So with Dream, 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 you could tune it up an octave and it'd still sound like rather than, which some vocal chops, trust me, do sound like that, and it is absolutely horrific. So I used a lot of formant shifting in this, but even then, a lot of sounds sounded very distorted, so I utilized a lot of drums and big transitions and things like that throughout that whole thing. Fortunately, not at the beginning here. That acapella was actually a lot harder to get, surprisingly, because even though Easy is one of Porter's most popular songs, and of course all credit to Matt Zoe, you are an incredible producer, and yes, your music is incredible. But despite the fact that it is one of Porter's bigger songs, there was no defined a cappella for it. And that is mostly because it was sampled off of a much older song, which was Colorblind's Nothing Better. It's an amazing song if anyone wants to go check it out. So basically, they took the vocal from that and resampled it, chopped it up, made some other things to make it tempo matched. So unfortunately, I had to also do all of those resyncings and tempo matchings, but only because I managed to actually get the a cappella from Nothing Better. I couldn't do the entire chop to in every way because it sounded unnatural no matter what I tried to do with it, so I made the decision to just stick with Loving You Is Easy. Now, fortunately, with this, I was able to get both the instrumental and full song, of course, of Only Way Out. I was not able to get the Only Way Out a cappella, which was a real bummer in this case, but the instrumental was fine enough for me at this point. So the entire thing leading up to that just takes the instrumental, and then as I stop putting in all the vocal chops, I just transition it straight into the chorus part of Only Way Out, which I felt like it was a really smooth transition and sort of felt like a whole new song was being introduced, even though it wasn't, which I really liked about it. Now, with every mashup, I oftentimes have a core song or songs that are a particular key that everything else gets matched to, and in this particular instance, that song was Only Way Out. Everything was effectively tuned to match the key of that because I wanted the drop of Only Way Out to be perfect and pristine exactly the way it was. Okay, so that was something kind of funny. One thing that I've always really loved was the little fill section of Madeon's OK. One thing that I had envisioned, initially I was thinking of this third mashup as being something a bit closer to the second one, that it was going to be a bit more boppy and energetic. And in that case, the prime thing that I was planning on doing was taking the fill of OK and feeding it directly into the drop of Madeon's Beings. I don't know, there's just something about it that sounded really cool. So I still managed to actually get that part in here, right about here. But of course, in this particular context, it was a little less boppy and energetic and more sort of emotionally driven. I mean, Beings was a more emotional drop, I think, within this particular context. So with this particular thing, I was able to get the acapella of Innocence and then match it up with the sort of bassy, housey drop section of Only Way Out. Innocence was one of the only acapellas I could get my hands on, but of course it features the incomparable Dan Smith, so it was perfect. I was able to get a hold of that one in particular. I used a lot of formant shifting on that because I had to change the key a lot in order to preserve his voice, because otherwise it would sound like a teenager going through puberty, which I did not want. Right as I was about to release this particular mashup, I realized that the transition into Beings was a bit too startling, so in the background of this, you can actually hear the melody start coming in, and then later on, just a little piano melody, just a little thing that I threw in just to sort of tie it all together. And it also, I felt like, added a little bit more atmosphere into the sound. The particular piano I used was this thing called Labs soft piano. It's a free instrument. Labs is a sampling platform thing that actually takes real samples from some of these different instruments, and the sound for soft piano as well as Labs itself is 100% free and open source for anyone to use it. I personally love the piano. I can recommend it more than anything else, so go check it out if you want some good soft concert hall style piano. But yeah, I wanted this to sort of be like a little break range, so that is why I took the more soft bassy part of the instrumental and then connected it with the really ballady, melodic Innocence vocal. I just realized I keep saying Innocence over and over again. It's La Lune. I'm a fake fan. I know. No, I'm sorry. I just get those two songs mixed up because they're very similar in tone to each other. But I love both of them. Yay, La Lune. But then continuing on from this point, once you start getting into the Beings drop, it's pretty consistent on its own. Also use formant shifting on that, but again, the percussion didn't work very well, so that is the one part of this that I actually implemented my own drums in order to fill it up. Again, side chaining the instrumental to make it happen. Good thing about side chaining these kind of things is that it doesn't cut out much of the actual music, but it does cut out most of the actual percussiveness. But if there's any sort of bass drumminess that's still left in there, it sort of adds to it and sort of fills in the gaps, which helps a lot. This is one part that I really love because you have this really big sort of build-up thing of Only Way Out that's just fed out from Innocence. And then the shelter vocal comes in. And that's really something that I wanted to do. I wanted it to be the tie over between the first and third mashups. and just have that be the little Easter egg that's thrown in there. A couple people, when they heard that for the first time, were like, oh my god! Joey in particular, when she heard it, was like, oh my god, they're gonna love that. So I put that in there, and if you notice in the background, you have the little piano melody playing, the melody of Nonsense, which I wasn't really able to implement into the mashup in its entirety. But I felt like it worked pretty well to just have that be a little piano thing in the background. Da, 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 da. And then later, da, 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 da. So that's its only presence in there, but it's just a little Easter egg to show that I was thinking of it. And then finally, you have this real kind of build up here to the all-in Only Way Out drop, in which I put sort of a bit crushed, distorted Dream, 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 and Shelter and Easy vocal into there. I just sort of felt like those massive gospel vocals lend themselves really, really well to that really sort of ethereal atmospheric instrumental, and sure enough, it worked perfectly. It's old Madeon and new Madeon fused in really well. Again, all of this is basically trial and error and just figuring out what works and what doesn't. So unfortunately, my camera ran out of space, so I'm continuing it on my phone camera, which is still very good quality, maybe even better quality, I don't know. So let's finish this up. Now, the reason why I chose to implement the Easy and Shelter vocals only at this particular point was because, especially as the drop of Only Way Out transitions from the first part to the second part, it just felt like it fit really well to sort of change it up from the Dream, Dream, Dream vocal that had been going on. So I did the exact same juxtaposition that you get at the very beginning of the song, where it goes from Dream, Dream, Dream to Easy, except instead this time the call and response ends up being Easy followed by Shelter, which has been introduced at this point. So Shelter is really the only vocal in this that just cuts through really strongly, and I wanted it to do that in particular. I wanted that to be the really big cutting sort of piercing sound, and it feels like it works really well. All I really did with any of these vocal chops was I sidechained all of them to where the kick drums coming through of the Only Way Out drop really lended themselves to cutting through each of these particular vocal chops, and that's how it resulted in the cleaner, like, pulsy sound. Now, this is an interesting little part of the song. I really wanted to include Home in there, since Home is probably my favorite Madeon song. It's very intimate, it's really beautiful, really big soaring chords, and it's one of the first examples of him actually singing on one of his own songs. And I wanted to add a little nod to the fact that I was sort of adding my own personal flavor to all the different songs, and wanted to include the fact that he has said multiple times that Home is one of his more personal songs as far as ones that he's done. So I had to do some tuning with the one acapella that I could get a hold of for Home, and unfortunately there was a lot of sort of staticness underneath it. It was kind of a choppy acapella in general, so when it was tuned up, even with the formant shifting and everything else, it sounded weird and awkward and sort of robotic. So I made the decision on that portion of the song that an octave down, I would sing along with him. And I made sure to really tune the vocals so that it would just sort of fade into the background a little bit so that his would come through stronger. But if you hear a lower octave voice on that particular part of the song, that is me singing along with him. I sang it using that microphone up there. That just goes to show minimal equipment, you can do anything. Oh, also, just, pro tip, if you have a choice between a Blue Yeti microphone and a Shure SM58, yes, that's a performance microphone, and yes, that is a dynamic microphone, but the audio quality for singing on that one sounds so much better. Of course, you can hear that Fellow Feeling comes back in there. I did a very similar thing with my own home vocals that I did towards the beginning with Dan Smith's La Lune vocals, in that I doubled the vocals and put a little bit of vocal synth on it to create that sort of robotic vocoded kind of thing. And it created these interesting artifacts that, almost came off as slightly percussive. In La Lune at the very beginning, you may notice some far off things of da, 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 that were not actually in the original songs. The vocal synth just sort of produced it out of nothing. But yeah, so it's basically fading through this very soft vocal part with just Fellow Feeling playing over it. And I basically cut off Only Way Out at the very end of the drop because the transition out of it just got a bit too inconsistent tempo-wise. So this just felt a bit more consistent as far as pretty much everything was concerned. A big part of me on this one part wanted to have some other drop. I thought, maybe at the end of it I could put Fellow Feeling as a drop on there, or the actual Dream 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 drop, or That's Where Beings could go, or just something like that. I really just want some kind of big epic finale closing conclusion kind of thing to this whole trilogy, similar to how it started with the Sea of Voices drop finishing out the first mashup. But in the end, I just really figured out nothing was really working, and I realized that if I just faded it out with the Fellow Feeling violin going and the Dream 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 vocals, it really is the perfect juxtaposition between one of the really beautiful songs of Madeon versus one of the really beautiful songs of Porter. And it ended effectively the way that it started, with just very stripped down to the absolute basics of two really amazing artists that sort of had their stuff flow together right at the end until it all fades off into nothingness. I really want to make sure that I got that little da-da at the end there, just because it felt like it, perfect thing to end on a literal high note. The Dream 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 vocal at the end has a little bit of a pitch bend to it, which I didn't do intentionally. That was just sort of an after effect of all the format shifting I did to it. But it created an interesting sort of broken record effect, so I decided to keep it in and not try to change it at all. And of course, this mashup was made so quickly and so frantically that I rendered out the visualizer for it, and then actually redid something in the original song to then swap out the audio with the new audio for the final render of it. But it was close enough. It was just like a couple little sound differences, I think. I think it was that little Beings piano part at the beginning there. But it was close enough that it just worked anyways. So that is pretty much it. That is all three mashups, basically walking through each of them. Really, a lot of stuff, like I've said throughout this entire thing, is just trial and error. The entire thing is puzzle pieces that haven't been created yet. I feel like a lot of people look at these really big mashups as, wow, there was some master plan that was created to create these flowing things and put them together. But a really big part of it is just figuring out the elements of these songs that you like, and then figuring out some way to get them all together at all costs, pretty much. Do whatever you have to, do whatever kind of crazy transitions or weird things that you need to make one thing flow into the other really well. And the good thing is, these elements of these songs, if they just feel right to you, then they probably are right. Which is why you're able to take this final mashup, which is so weird. It has everything from Beings to Dream 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 to Nonsense to Fellow Feeling, and it's still able to flow together pretty well. It's all transitions and taking isolated elements, because when you take the isolated elements outside of the context of the song, you are sort of given permission to change the entire tone of the song without having to actually change what the original song was meant for. Which is why you can have a very laid-back, gospel-y feel with Dream 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 that fits in so well with this beautiful violin of Fellow Feeling. You are given permission with these mashups to take things that should make no sense together and put them together in a way that you enjoy it. The great thing is, you are creating the puzzle. You have full creativity over exactly what you want to use it with. You have all these elements and materials that are out in front of you, and using whichever ones you can get a hold of and whichever ones you can find, make it work. Even if it means completely remaking some of these melodies or these songs entirely, or adding in percussion or something like that to make it work out. As long as it sounds good to you and other people, then it's good. You're fine. You have permission to do that. Really, just making things that you enjoy is the big takeaway from all of this. And if it's something that you like, then it's good, even if you're the only one who thinks so. And if it's something you don't like, well, then keep working on it until you come up with something you really enjoy. Or maybe other people like it, That's one thing I've learned from this last mashup is I wasn't crazy about it. I didn't think a lot of people would like it. I was super nervous to see what everyone would think. I thought they would see it as being really rushed and forced and put together frantically. But then people really liked it, and I've grown to really like it too. That being said, guys, I think this is going to wrap this super long video up. Really, all I have to say is this Friday, Sight Unseen is going to be coming out on all major streaming platforms. I'm going to get a video up on YouTube of Sight Unseen on Friday when it officially releases. I think it's one that you all are really, really going to like. I'm going to have it as the outro song for this, and I think you guys are really, really going to enjoy it. It's super weird and eclectic. It has like this creepy 80s-ish vibe mixed in with the really big bassy sounds. It's nostalgic and anxiety-inducing, which I think fits in really perfectly with its spot on the Chaos album. But really, all I can ask of you guys once the song comes out is please buy it if you can. If you don't have the money to buy it, or you're not in a position where you can do that, if you can stream it on Apple Music or Spotify or even YouTube, just stream it as much as you can, share it with your friends, anything you can possibly do. I really want to be able to keep all this stuff going, and it's because of the people that are like you that I'm able to keep doing stuff like this. But I need to be able to make at least enough money to be able to support everything that I'm trying to do with this, while I'm also working on college stuff and everything like that. So really, any bit of viewership helps, because, you know, I want to be able to keep doing this, and if there's any kind of promise that I'm able to do that, that's good in my book. So overall, I hope you all have really enjoyed this video. I hope it's been informative, or that you've learned something from it, and I will see you all later.